Hello, howdy. Welcome to another episode of cEDH Academy. I believe this is episode 4 at this point. We're going to go over a little bit more of an older win condition in this episode, and that one is called Altar of Dementia. Very quickly, we'll cover what Altar of Dementia does, in which you sacrifice a creature and then target player mills cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. This is utilized in infinite mill strategies to either fill your entire graveyard with your library, comboed with Underworld Breach, or to mill out your entire opponent's libraries, make them have to draw, and lose the game. Released nearly 2 decades ago, this was one of the oldest winning cons in the book, but compared to today's day and age, it's a little bit too risky to really just draw and pass after milling out the opponents, so we don't really see it that much anymore, but we still see it from time to time, and it still has its place. So in this episode, we're going to go ahead and cover where that place is, and what to look out for when your opponents might pull this one out. The most popular and probably the strongest deck in the current format that you'll be seeing Altar of Dementia playing in is of course in a Dargo deck. Now most notably, Dargo is best with Tymna in the current state of cEDH, but you could see him in a few other combinations. But regardless, this loop that I'm going to demonstrate is something you can do in mono red, so Dargo plus anything can pull this off. Now with Dargo, the combination you go with this one, there could be a few ways to go about it, but the easiest to think about would be with Birgi, God of Storytelling. Dargo has the ability that reduces its cost by 2 for everything you've sacrificed this turn. Of course, everything being sacrificing creatures or artifacts specifically. So once you sacrifice 3 things total, you'll be able to cast Dargo for just 1 red mana. Once that happens, it triggers Birgi to generate 1 red mana. When Dargo enters, the 1 red mana is created, you then can sacrifice Dargo to Altar of Dementia, milling either yourself 7 cards or an opponent 7 cards. That of course is another creature sacrificed this turn, reducing the cost by 2 generic mana again. At that point, it pays for that commander tax to recast Dargo, and you can use that 1 floating mana from Birgi to recast the Dargo. Once it's cast, it generates another mana from Birgi for another red. It enters, sacrifice an Altar of Dementia, that mills another 7 cards for yourself or an opponent. That's another 2 reduced cost for generic mana for Dargo, so you can cast it again for just 1 red mana, and now you can see the loop. With just these 3 pieces, you can just go ahead and mill out all 3 opponents' libraries to the point where they would have to lose the moment they go to the draw step. It's a little bit risky though, because other players nowadays use things like Born Upon the Wind, Valley of Floodcaller, and High Face Trickster to be able to just win out the game on their upkeep. Because of that progression of power, we don't see that infinite mill to win strategies as often these days. It's still viable, but it doesn't guarantee the win. It still gives some players a chance, especially if they have blue in their identity. There's also a land called Emergent Zone that would be able to be cracked on any deck because as a colorless land, it can be put in anything they want. But when comboing these with Underworld Breach, you'll be able to mill out your entire library so you have everything accessible and easily pay the escape costs to then cast whatever you want. You'll find cheap mana rocks, ritual spells, whatever it is that you need to find the win from there. Most commonly with Dargo, it would be a Goblin Bombardment at this point. So every time you cast Dargo, you generate that 1 mana to just loop Dargo. You sacrifice it to Goblin Bombardment instead to ping out their table, and that way you can secure victory on that spot. You don't have to risk passing and hoping the opponents don't win on their upkeep. Another deck I'd like to highlight for this Altar of Dementia loop would be Kroxa and Kunaros. This is one of my pet decks in cEDH. It's certainly not strong at all. You'll pretty much never see this in tournaments at all, but I just think it's really awesome that this is a 1-card win combination with Kroxa and Kunaros. I'm just say Kroku at this point because it's a lot easier to say. So every time Kroku enters the battlefield or attacks, you may exile 5 cards from your graveyard, and when you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if you have Altar of Dementia in play, cast Kroku. In response to the ETB trigger, you sacrifice Kroku to Altar of Dementia. As Kroku's sacrifice, you then mill 6 cards because that's the power of Kroku. Now the Altar of Dementia trigger has been resolved, you can then go back to the Kroku trigger that was on the stack. Exile 5 cards from your graveyard, leaving 1 behind because you net positive 1 in your graveyard every time. Bring Kroku back. There's another ETB trigger. Look at that. In response, sacrifice it to Altar of Dementia and mill another 6 cards. At that point, you can exile another 5 cards, put those away, bring Kroku back to its own trigger. You now have 2 more cards in your library than you started with. You'll keep doing until you have about this many cards in your exile with about this many cards in your graveyard. One of those cards though would be Karmic Guide and the other being Abdel Adrian. In response to that final Kroku trigger, once you have both these creatures in your graveyard, you bring Karmic Guide back instead. Karmic Guide says that whenever this creature enters, return target creature card from your graveyard to your battlefield. That would be Abdel Adrian. When Abdel Adrian enters the battlefield, battlefield, you can exile any amount of permanents you want, such as Karmic Guide and anything else, then sacrifice them to Altar of Dementia, milling out your opponents at this point. Once Abdel Adrian leaves, this brings back all of those exiled permanents to the battlefield. Now this is only for non-land permanents, but if you have mana rocks, you'd be able to generate infinite mana by doing this, because as Karmic Guide enters, it would bring Abdel Adrian back from the graveyard, tap all these for mana response, and then exile them to Abdel Adrian, sacrifice Abdel Adrian to Altar of Dementia, bring back all of these mana rocks that would come in untapped because there's exiled and then returned, and then you can tap them again for mana, generating infinite mana. Every time Abdel Adrian leaves, you also create a 1/1 white soldier, so you can create an infinite army at this point. But unless you have a haste enabler, that doesn't really matter for a whole lot, but this will allow you to mill out your entire opponent's libraries without casting any more spells, so you're not going to draw them any more cards to the Ristic Study or anything of that sort. And if before this loop started you had some way of getting Meat Hook Massacre, Mayhem Devil, or Orcish Bowmasters onto the field, then infinitely flickering Orcish Bowmasters will be able to do infinite pings. Your sacrificing of Abdel Adrian infinitely will trigger Mayhem Devil, and the creature dying of Abdel Adrian will also trigger Meat Hook Massacre. All three of these options in combination with Altar of Dementia and Kroxa being out in the first place basically means you'll be able to win the game just from these two cards plus one of these three. But even if you don't have these out yet, you still would be able to infinitely mill out your opponents, which probably will win the game, but not guaranteed, so it'd be good to get a setup here. 6 mana cost commander, some setup though. It's just too slow for cEDH, so you don't really see them anymore, but pet deck, so I had to talk about it. Speaking of pet decks, going back to popularity in the cEDH meta these days, a deck people try to work Altar of Dementia into is in fact Lumra, Belle of the Woods. The idea with Lumra and Altar of Dementia is you can sacrifice Lumra to Altar of Dementia after the ETB trigger goes on the stack to then mill even more cards based on how many lands you have, and then try to get more lands out from the ETB trigger. If you combo this with a land sack outlet such as Zuran Orb, and some way of either getting the lands come in untapped like Horizon Explorer, or a way of making mana as the lands enter like with Lotus Cobra, you should be able to generate an infinite loop where you're able to infinitely mill out your entire library until you get all the lands that you care about onto the battlefield and start the loop from there. At some point you should be able to find a win along the way if you have Lotus Cobra and Zuran Orb, or if you have an untapper with Zuran Orb or some other sack outlet, you'll be able to get to an infinite win condeterministically. Lotus Cobra and 7 untapper is non-deterministic, an untapper with a sack outlet is deterministic. Most Lumra players have since realized that Altar of Dementia is a little bit more of a win more card. It certainly does have good value, especially in long grind games, but in most cases if you can win with Altar of Dementia, you should be able to win without Altar of Dementia as well. So you'll usually not find that in Lumra either, but don't be surprised if you see it pop up. The last commander I want to talk about for Altar of Dementia is a pet deck of a friend of mine named Nil, aka Nilstan. Nil is one of the leaders of the community called Tough Mulligans that runs monthly free tournaments and an awesome community to be a part of on Discord. I'll have the link in the description below. A fantastic place to go if you're new to cEDH and want to get more involved in the community, talk to more people about cEDH, and try to find online games you can play with people through Spelltable, Convoke, or some other kind of webcam-based platform. The monthly tournaments are also free, so there's really no downside of joining them whatsoever. Nil's pet deck of choice that uses Altar of Dementia is of course Safi, Eric's daughter. Safi is a very cheap to cast Selesnya commander that has the ability to sacrifice herself to give a target creature a certain ability. That ability is when it's put in the graveyard this turn, you return that card back to the battlefield. There's a lot of really cool win loops with Safi, but one that's specifically with Altar of Dementia and can either be done on turn 1 is pairing that with Renegade Rallier. Renegade Rallier has the ability that says that when it enters the battlefield, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, return a target permanent card with a converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So what you do is you have Altar of Dementia out, cast Safi, cast Renegade Rallier. On the ETB trigger of Renegade Rallier, you sacrifice Safi to give Renegade Rallier that ability to return to the battlefield once it's put in the graveyard. Safi is now in the graveyard. Altar of Dementia you can activate to sacrifice Renegade Rallier to mill yourself 3 cards, or what you most likely do in this situation, because you're Selesnya, is you mill out a target opponent's library for 3. Renegade Rallier has died, Altar of Dementia sacrifice trigger was done, target opponent mills out, but by this happening, Renegade Rallier had the Safi ability on it, so it returns to the battlefield. When Renegade Rallier returns to the battlefield, it brings back Safi, a permanent card with converted mana cost 2 or less. At this point, you can then sacrifice Safi to give the new Renegade Rallier that ability again, sacrifice Renegade Rallier to Altar of Dementia, mill out a target opponent's library by 3 cards. That Safi trigger has resolved though, bringing back Renegade Rallier, which then brings back Safi. It's a 3-card loop combo that can infinitely mill out your opponent's libraries. It's possible to do this both on turn 1 or with so much stacks or otherwise protection that you should be able to fairly reliably win the game by infinitely milling out your opponent's libraries. It's still a little risky, but with some stacks or doing it fast enough, you should be able to find the win. So that's that on Altar of Dementia, a card that's best comboed with Underworld Breach. With this, you can infinitely mill out your library into your graveyard, fuel it to have access to your permanents and other spells to use for Underworld Breach. This value is best seen when you don't have blue to brain freeze yourself stealth, and you don't want to use like a tight window like Grinding Station, or risk giving your opponents cards with Wheel of Fortune. If you see a Dario deck, be on the lookout for potentially seeing Altar of Dementia lines. Don't be too surprised if you see it in Lemra. You can also see it in specialist decks like Safi, as well as some really unorthodox and fringe decks being unlocked such as Kroxan Kunos. Altar of Dementia is a win line that is generally fairly risky in today's meta, but is really good for reliably filling your graveyard if you have graveyard-based game plans, especially with Underworld Breach. If you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and give me a comment what do you think about Altar of Dementia and the current state of the cEDH meta, as well as what other win conditions or decks or other things you want me to cover in cEDH. As always, thanks for watching. I appreciate you.